This is a video overview of Chapter 2, Nutrition Guidelines Applying the Science of Nutrition, from Nutrition Science and Applications by Lori Smolin and Mary Grosvenor. Nutrition guidelines have been produced since 1956, when the Basic Four recommended a minimum of number of foods from each of 4 food groups: milk, meat, veggies and fruits, and bread and cereal, and focused on getting enough. In the beginning of our 20th century, our big issue was having enough food, which quickly transitioned soon after these 1956 guidelines came out to more of a concern with eating a little bit too much. In 1992, the food pyramid organized the food groups into a pyramid shape to emphasize the relative contribution of each group. More should be consumed from the foods at the bottom of the pyramid. This became problematic with the language of servings. So 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta was pretty ambiguous because portion sizes started getting so big. So people were thinking that 1 serving of pasta might be what they were served at a restaurant. However, 1 serving of pasta is really only half cup of pasta, which is only about a quarter of the amount that you would get at a typical restaurant. Then in 2005, a pyramid was designed by the USDA to encourage physical activity and to recommend foods based on ounces and cups rather than servings. However, this food pyramid didn't actually have any food on it and was pretty confusing for consumers to use. So now, in 2011, My Plate, which is shown here, is the latest food guide. This food guide was meant to be a little bit more user-friendly so people could actually see foods on a plate in recommended portion sizes. The food pyramid and plates are based on recommendations that are scientific, called the DRIs, or dietary reference intakes. There are a few different volumes of DRIs written for a number of different nutrients. One volume is written for calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, vitamin D, and fluoride. Another for B vitamins and choline. Another for vitamin C, E, selenium, and beta-carotene. Another for energy and macronutrients, and the last for electrolytes and water. And you'll actually see that your nutrition book for Nutrition 230 is organized in a similar way. So rather than seeing just vitamin and mineral chapters, you're going to see them organized by functionality, just as the DRIs are. The DRIs for macronutrients are the following. Carbohydrates are recommended in percentages of 45 to 65%. Protein is recommended in percentages of 10 to 35%, and fat as 20 to 35%. As you can see, you could have a higher carb, higher fat, or higher protein diet with any of these broad parameters. DRIs are recommended for macronutrients as well as micronutrients. In addition to the AMDR, we have the EER, which is a recommendation for how many calories you need a day. The EAR, or estimated average requirement, is used for population data, such as school lunches, whereas the RDA is used to recommend specific amounts that will meet around 97 of the population's needs. The AI is used, for example, with vitamin D, where intake is really highly different depending on the person's absorption and depending on the person's, for example, with vitamin D sun exposure. And so AIs are used when there isn't enough info to establish an RDA. Lastly, the UL is the tolerable upper intake level, or the point at which, when you go over it, you could be at risk for toxicity symptoms. Here's another little graph. You might have remembered this one from Nutrition 101. Showing that the EAR meets 50% of the population's needs, the RDA meets about 97, and then the UL is set well above the RDA. Based on the DRIs, we then developed the dietary guidelines for Americans. Our current dietary guidelines recommend that we get adequate nutrients within our calorie needs, that we manage our weight, promote physical activity, encourage some food groups, and discourage others. And then there are specific recommendations on types of fats and types of carbs, increasing potassium and decreasing sodium, limits on alcoholic beverages, and then some points in food safety. So one dietary guideline is to balance calories. Obesity is an epidemic in our country, so encouraging physical activity while making sure that we consume less calories and be more physically active will be the recommendation that will be appropriate for the majority of people in our country. We don't tend to eat enough fruits and vegetables, don't tend to eat enough whole grains or low-fat dairy products, don't have variety in our protein intake, especially with seafood, which is high in omega-3s, and we eat too many solid fats, so oils are encouraged. These changes are going to help us increase potassium, fiber, calcium, as well as vitamin D. We should reduce our trans fat, cholesterol, and sodium intake. There have been steps taken to eliminate trans fat from our food supply, which is a political move. And then we also can reduce our beverages with sugar. In order to build healthy eating patterns, the USDA recommends us to follow the Choose My Plate guidelines. These Choose My Plate guidelines are for a 2,000 calorie diet, but you can go to choosemyplate.gov and type in your own information to find your personal dietary guidelines. We also have a supplement to our Wiley Plus site, which is called iProfile, and you can log into iProfile and calculate your needs for not only the dietary guidelines, but also for the DRIs, because the real goal is to meet the DRIs, and the dietary guidelines are a strategy with a typical American diet to do that. The DASH diet, or the Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension Eating Plan, encourages a diet that's high in potassium and low in sodium in order to reduce the risk of hypertension or high blood pressure. So you can see here that the recommendation for fruits and veggies are higher, and the recommendations for lean meats, poultry, and fish are a little bit lower, and sweets and added sugars are low to none. We also have the Mediterranean food plan. This food plan also decreases the recommendation for our meats and for poultry and eggs, and encourages more consumption of fish and more consumptions of healthy fats from olive oil, nuts, and seeds. My Plate encourages balancing calories, so eating less because the majority of our American population is considered overweight, and avoiding oversized portions. It's also suggested that we make sure to make half of our plates fruits and vegetables, make half our grains whole grains, and switch to lower fat dairy to reduce saturated fat intake. In addition, we should be reducing sodium intake by comparing our foods using nutrition facts labels and making sure that we're drinking water rather than drinking our calories, because drinking calories doesn't produce satiating effects. And as you can see, there are some key recommendations within each food group as well. So for grains, making half our grains whole. For veggies, varying our veggies with specific subcategories of vegetables such as dark green, red and orange, beans and peas, starchy veggies, and other veggies having specific recommendations for the week. Fruits, focus on fruit, choosing whole fruit rather than fruit juice in order to make sure we're getting enough fiber. Getting calcium-rich foods through lower fat dairy to reduce saturated fat intake, and further reducing saturated fat intake by choosing lean proteins or proteins from vegetarian sources. You can see here that recommendations for cups and ounces are recommended in each of the food categories. So for grains, 1 cup is a size of a baseball, for example, and 1 ounce of grains would be something like a half cup of rice. Also, when you look at vegetables, you can see that vegetables, again, you could have a baseball-sized serving of vegetables in order to count that as a cup, or 2 baseballs full of raw vegetables. For fruits, a cup of fruit, again, is about a baseball-sized fruit, or a cup of 100% fruit juice. For dairy, you could have 1.5 ounces of hard cheese, or 2 cups of cottage cheese, 1 cup of milk or yogurt, 1 cup of pudding or frozen yogurt, or 1.5 cups of ice cream. So as you can see, if you choose cheese or ice cream, because of the high fat intake, you're actually having a lot of added empty calories as well. And then for protein, you could have 1 egg, you could have 12 almonds, you could have 7 walnut halves, or you could have 1 ounce of meat in order to equal an ounce. So make sure you head into Wiley Plus and experiment here on iProfile, learning about these different portion sizes through some of the key resources on the tab on the right. Now, empty calories are going to be found within each food group. So we have some nutrient-dense foods, as we talked about in Chapter 1, and some foods with a lot of energy coming from empty calories. By choosing foods that are lower in added sugar, lower in white or refined starches, and lower in solid fats and higher in oils, we can really reduce our empty calorie intake. Empty calories on a 2,000 calorie diet are recommended in the mid 200 range, and it's really easy to add that up just by choosing things like whole milk or cheese or fatty cuts of meat, where most Americans would probably rather save up those empty calories for dessert. Now, our food labels are being updated this year. The new food label will come out in 2018, but for our current food label, we can learn the nutrition facts and nutrition information by using the following panel. Make sure you check out Moodle for information on the new food label that's coming out in 2018. When we look at food labels, the current one and the one in 2018 is going to be based on daily reference values or percentages. Note that these reference daily values are based on a 2,000 calorie diet, so those percentages are not necessarily going to represent the entire population's needs. Micronutrients vary a little bit less than macronutrients do, however. Ingredients are listed from heaviest to lightest, so focusing on foods that have higher natural sources higher up in the ingredients list is really important, and sugar should be further down the list. Right now, added sugar isn't on the food label, but it will be added in the 2018 label, so you won't have to be searching for sugars only on the list of ingredients anymore. Supplements are regulated at a lot lower level than foods are. Check out the video from Bigger, Faster, Stronger that I posted on Moodle if you didn't see it in my Nutrition 101 class, and it can be pretty eye-opening to how low regulated supplements are. You want to make sure that you have a third-party verification in any dietary supplement label, so somebody who didn't manufacture the supplement has checked it for higher quality. There are a number of descriptors on food labels. These include nutrient content claims, health claims, and structure function claims. Nutrient content claims, as you can see in Table 2.6, are very highly regulated. Words like free, low, extra lean, high, good source, and reduced need to contain specific amounts of nutrients. Furthermore, things like light, more, fresh, high potency, and antioxidants also have specific regulations. Health claims are based on significant scientific agreements or authoritative statements, and then there are also qualified health claims that have to have a little disclaimer on them. One example of an authorized health claim would be reduces cholesterol. So if something has a lot of soluble fiber in it, you can say that it reduces cholesterol. Structure function claims are not highly regulated. My favorite example of a structure function claim is Red Bull gives you wings. You have to put a claim on the bottom saying that they're not approved by the FDA, or else you can sue, which somebody actually did with Red Bull, and their settlement was agreed upon. So now Red Bull has a disclaimer on the bottom saying that it will not really give you wings necessarily. That hasn't been approved by the FDA. Lastly, there are some exchange lists used for meal planning. These are developed by the American Dietetics Association and Diabetes Association. You may see lists of what exchange values are on the bottom of your nutrition facts panel. We'll talk about these a little bit more when we talk about diabetes in Chapter 4. Make sure to check out your Wiley Plus assignments for Chapter 2, pre and post lecture, and feel free to refer back to this presentation if you have more questions.